Chag Sameach. As sometimes is customary before certain television shows or movies, a little disclaimer. This Devar Torah recounts violent and tragic incidents and focuses on a sensitive subject. Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Pesachim, 54b. The sages teach that there are 7 matters that are concealed from human beings. They are the day of their death, the day they will be consoled from their worries, what is truly in the heart of another person, how the best way is for a person to earn a profit, when the house of David will be restored, when wicked authoritarian governments will cease to exist, and the last matter that is concealed from human beings are the depths of justice. The depths of justice. My friends, sometimes a story pulls up a rusty, uncomfortable folding chair, sits down in your soul and refuses to leave. For me, that is the tragic story of Michael Tisius, who was executed by lethal injection earlier this year by the state of Missouri. Tisius was 42 years old. He committed the crime for which he was sentenced to death when he was 19. Despite loud and wide-ranging pleas for clemency, from the American Bar Association to the NAACP to representatives from the European Union, the Vatican, and half of the jurors in Tisius's original trial, the governor did not commute his sentence to life in prison. Michael Tisius was not innocent. After his release from a 30-day incarceration for a probation violation in the year 2000, Tisius was convinced by his cellmate, then 27-year-old Roy Vance, to, once Michael was out, return to the prison with a gun, threatened the jailers on guard, and herd them into a cell, while Vance's girlfriend would help him escape, just like in a movie plot. What could possibly go wrong? Of course it went wrong. Michael Tisius panicked, shot, and killed the 2 guards. Vance and his girlfriend are still serving life terms. But Michael Tisius was the one who pulled the trigger. By the time the handcuffs were put on him, he had expressed deep remorse. He was, by all accounts, a model inmate for more than 2 decades, maturing and developing as an adult in prison. His art, as is not uncommon, was beautiful and moving. His psychiatrist, Stephen Peterson, in his final report in the Huffington Post on June 7th of this year, said that he had learned self-control, has empathy for others, shows empathy for the men he killed, is no longer impulsive, and is seeking to make the best life he can in his current situation. In pictures of young Michael, he is smiling widely and adorably. Behind the camera, though, his childhood was one of neglect, abandonment, and abuse, a toxic mess that, combined with his age at the time of the crime, contributed to a severe neurological deficit, according to the evaluating psychiatrists. Vance admitted in sentencing hearings that he took ready advantage of Michael's obvious need for approval, belonging, and a sense of a semblance of family. In the end, though, Michael Tisius paid for his crimes with his life. And then a few weeks later, on August 2nd, a federal jury voted to sentence Robert Bowers, the man convicted of murdering 11 Shabbat worshipers at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue in the worst anti-Semitic attack in United States history. They sentenced him to death. And oh my gosh, what a twist of the guts. What to feel? Relief? Despair? Elation? Sadness? Gratitude? In extended reporting by Matthew Littman and Jody Redoran, relatives of 9 of the victims supported that decision, writing in the Pittsburgh Jewish Chronicle last year that there is a time for compassion and a time to stand up and say enough is enough. Rabbi Jonathan Perlman, who leads a congregation that met in the same building in Squirrel Hill and was there the day of the massacre, and we were here, and wherever we were, we will never forget it. Rabbi Perlman urged the United States Attorney General not to pursue the ultimate punishment against Bowers, saying, "Let him live with the pain he caused forever." Reacting to the decision in the foreword, Perlman wrote, "Revenge will not bring our slave loved ones back to life, and seeking revenge may even hurt ourselves and extend our sadness." It should be noted that the only remorse that that man has expressed is that he didn't take out more people that morning. And to that he has held, and will likely for a very long time. Prior to the sentencing, rabbis across the country shared their opinions of how Jewish people might prepare themselves for the soul searching that this perennially torturous subject elicits. Broadly, as recently as 10 years ago, American Jews are less supportive of capital punishment compared to all Americans who were surveyed. Apparently, we support it by about 33%. Americans overall were surveyed, they said their support was hovering around 44%. But that's actually way, way down from even a couple of decades ago, when support for the death penalty topped around 70%. The Torah, as you all know, lists many crimes that are eligible for the death penalty, including murder, adultery and idolatry, violating the Sabbath, being a rebellious child. But the Talmud makes clear that it's to be used rarely, if ever. The Mishnah leaves us suspended between multiple moral perspectives on the death penalty. In Tractate Makot, which centers around court-administered punishments, we get 3 positions, each more opposed to capital punishment than the one before, and then a 4th one that doesn't get quoted all that often, that presents a classic counterpoint. The relevant passage says, "The court that kills once in every 7 years is called a destructive court." Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, "The court that kills once in every 70 years is considered a destructive court." Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva further say, "If we had been on the court, no one would have ever been sentenced to death." But often the last line is skipped. It quotes Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel saying that the position of Rabbis Tarfon and Akiva multiply murderers in Israel. He makes the classic deterrence argument. You have to kill people to stop people from killing people. Criminologists have debated this for decades. The American Civil Liberties Union found in 2007 that states with the death penalty do not have lower crime rates or murder rates than states without such laws. 2012 paper from the National Research Council says the scholarly evidence on the deterrent effect of capital punishment is too weak to guide decisions on policy. Rabbi Akiva was famous for interpreting even the crowns atop the letters in the Torah scroll, a staunch advocate that nothing in it, no word, no syllable, no letter was superfluous. And in that vein, every single soul serves some purpose in creation. Rabbi Tarfon, an adherent to the notoriously austere school of Shammai, is actually recorded more often as opposing the severity of his colleagues and inclining toward leniency. So it's therefore no wonder that their strategy to circumvent capital punishment would be actually to abolish it. But Rabbi Shimon frequently saw the needs and concerns of the community superseding those of the individual. And that explains probably his approach to the challenge of capital punishment being its own deterrent. And thus the wicked could escape death by being threatened with the prospect of it. And as a brief aside, to make it especially hard to hand down a sentence of death in the ancient world, our sages also held that 2 witnesses needed to be first identified who had not only seen the event take place, but had warned the would-be perpetrator of a potential punishment of death. So using Rabbi Shimon's argument that murders increase in the absence of capital punishment, in modern-day America remains highly questionable. You will remember the name Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker. He's one of the many rabbis in one of the many conversations that I read and listened to. Rabbi Citron Walker was the rabbi of the synagogue in Colleyville, Texas, who endured a day-long hostage situation with several congregants in the thick of COVID. It ended with the death of the gunman, killed by law enforcement after they escaped. Rabbi Charlie was asked how he felt about the gunman's death just recently. He said, "I didn't have an emotional response, then or now. Maybe it was because he kept repeating that he loved death more than we loved life, or because he talked with us all day about he was planning to die. I don't feel he got what he deserved, as the cliche goes. If anything, I just feel sad that he lost his life because he believed virulent anti-Semitic lies and acted on them." In the Tree of Life case, it seems clear, said Rabbi Charlie, that the gunman planned it and knew what he was doing. There is no doubt that he committed the crimes. All of the strict requirements that would have allowed a Sanhedrin, the Jewish court of old, to condemn him to death have been met. For these reasons, I do not oppose this individual receiving the death penalty. But I offer this without hatred or a desire for revenge, just terrible sadness and mourning. Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky has said that the American death penalty is the wrong answer to the right question, the question of how should societies reckon with those who would abuse, violate, and kill innocent victims. Because mass incarceration has grown and overgrown reasonable boundaries and police power is wielded in such racially invidious ways, there are some who renounce the very concept of coercive punishment entirely and would have us abolish our entire prison system. But Rabbi Jeremy says there is nothing in Jewish tradition that says vicious people should escape human justice. Sometimes the state will have to confront violence with the violence of incarceration, and in the most extreme cases, the state may have to wield the ultimate violence, execution. But the Torah asserts the paradoxical view that because human life is infinitely precious, capital punishment is the only morally appropriate response to homicide. Genesis 9:6, whoever sheds human blood by human hands will his blood be shed. For in the divine image, God created humanity. But also in the discussion of the rabbis, one of the most famous teachings in rabbinic literature says that saving a single life saves the world, and destroying a single life destroys the whole world. That conversation comes in a discussion of the dangers of executing an innocent person who has been wrongly convicted. It is estimated that nearly 200 death row prisoners have been exonerated in the United States, exonerated since 1973. Hasty juries, perhaps unscrupulous prosecutors and defense counsels who weren't up to the task, nearly destroyed a world 200 times over. But how can we not change to respond to the real society in which we live? Political and social thinking has to reflect the world as it is, not just how it is in books. Apparently, it made sense in biblical Israel to execute people for gathering sticks on Shabbat and for sexual transgressions. But please God, even the most rigorous halachic authorities, I pray they're not dreaming of reinstituting such punishments today. Heaven help us. Our world has changed, so our vision of justice has and will continue to change. Capital punishment can be warranted only in those rare cases when it would make society more just as we reckon justice. And the racial disparities in American criminal justice are the principal reason why many people feel the American death penalty is such bad policy. Rabbi Beth Berkowitz notes that the ancient rabbis were very concerned with how executions were done. They debated details of how criminal executions should be performed, and they introduced the notion, if there is such a thing, of a mitah yafa, a good death. She says, I don't think it's a huge stretch to see a connection with the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. We can't just debate the death penalty in theory. We have to debate it in practice. Between bungled executions and the now very real and documented evidence of trauma experienced by the executioners, we need to stop and think. Cantor Michael Zussman runs a group called L'chaim, Jews Against the Death Penalty. He held a vigil outside of the Supreme Court on June 29th to protest the sentencing phase of the Tree of Life trial. He began by chanting the El Maleh Rachamim. They always offer this prayer for the victims and their families with kavod, respect, and kavanah, intention. But Cantor Zussman is a hospital chaplain, and he regularly counsels mourners that they must feel permission to experience the full gamut of human emotion while grieving, including rage and the terribly human desire for vengeance. Let no one ever judge anyone for feeling that. But he prays, as do I, that though, God forbid, we should ever experience such a thing, and we might even advocate for the death of a loved one's killer, we pray that no one would judge us for doing so, because a civilized society has a responsibility to protect and honor all who feel that way, while also upholding the most basic human rights upon which this world stands. And fundamental to these rights is the right to life itself. Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker reminds us that it's so Jewish and so human to disagree. This is life and death. We'll stand here in a few moments asking who will live and who will die today, and we all have strong emotions about it. Not only the families of those who were murdered, but of those who survived, those who are and were members of that beautiful, tormented shul, and those of all Jewish people, and that's all of us, impacted and traumatized by such events. There's a reason our chat for our YouTube is shut down on the high holidays. There's a reason I can't sit down during the service for more than a minute because my eyes are watching who is watching us. There is a reason that we made our stream today unlisted as opposed to public, because we can't take a chance of someone calling in a fake attack, terrifying us and siphoning resources away from where they are most needed. This is all because of him. It was building to it. Probably we had our heads in the sand for a long time. But those beautiful people whose names we'll say during the martyrology, they are us. They look exactly like us. They still do. And they were good and beautiful people who didn't just come to shul. They volunteered. They encouraged people to register to vote. They drove elderly friends who couldn't to their appointments and to see their families. They shopped for people. They cooked. They cared. They did everything that we're supposed to do. So how do we conduct the conversation that it remains for the sake of heaven? Cantor Zussman and people who are absolutely opposed to the death penalty in any form often cite that the most common form of capital punishment currently in use in the United States is a direct legacy of the Nazi regime. May their names be blotted out. First implemented by the Third Reich in its famous Action T4 protocol. In 2021, The Guardian reported that Arizona had spent more than $2,000 to acquire the ingredients for cyanide gas, which the Nazis used under the name Zyklon B. When Cantor Zussman was a child, his Passover seders and other holiday gatherings were punctuated by his grandmother and sisters sharing details of their Holocaust experiences. It was obvious to him during his formative years that anyone who had killed his family members, as well as those who killed the Polish Catholic man who gave his life rather than reveal the location of their hiding place on his farm, that anyone who had killed those good people deserved to die. As he saw it then, the law of retaliation was clearly permitted by the Torah's famous phrase, ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye, period. But of course, even the Talmudic rabbis didn't exact an eye for an eye, because we've been struggling this for thousands of years. After 3 years of serving as a Jewish prison chaplain in Canada, Cantor Zussman explored the issue of state killing. He saw firsthand profound examples of repentance and change in individuals whose crimes might have qualified for the death penalty in many states in the US. And at the same time, the reality of the wrongful conviction epidemic and the state killing of innocent human beings really hit home. And it was the shadow of the Shoah itself that led him to cast off his final misgivings for the light of abolishing the death penalty. He read the words of none other than Elie Wiesel in a 1988 interview, who, despite everything that he had experienced, said, "With every cell of my being and with every fiber of my memory, I oppose the death penalty in all forms." Cantor Zussman's change of heart was complete. The Holocaust had morphed for him from one of the greatest justifications for the death penalty to the most significant reason to stand against it, even for the Tree of Life synagogue shooter. Teshuvah can be profound. There are Reformed extremists who now help to educate about and combat the hate that at one time in their lives was eating them alive. Repentance and responsibility are related, but are not the same thing. The Talmud reports that even those led to execution were instructed to confess and make teshuvah, because this is the criminal's moral and spiritual burden. Hard to imagine the Tree of Life massacreist ever expressing teshuvah. But from there I turn back to the Talmud. In Masechet Brachot, the story is told that there were once some lawless men who caused Rabbi Meir a great deal of trouble. And so Rabbi Meir prayed that they would die. But his wife, Beruria, said to him, "How can you think that such a prayer is permitted? When sin ceases, there shall be no more wicked people. Therefore, pray for them that they turn from their ways, so that there will be no more wicked people." A wise man who listened to his wife, he began to pray on their behalf. And reading some of these wise rabbis' comments we are graced to share a time with, this was where the stories overlapped. Because Cantor Michael Zussman was a pen pal of Mike Tisius. Like many other men and women condemned to die before him, Michael used his final statement to re-articulate the sincere apology that he had been expressing for years, and he wrote from his clearly Christian perspective. "I'm sorry it had to come to this in this way. I wish I could have made things right while I was still here. I really did try to become a better man. and I pray that God will forgive those who condemn me. I am sorry, and not because I'm at the end, but because I am truly sorry. We are making our way through Yom Kippur, and we stand at the precipice. We ask to be judged fairly, with mercy and with the possibility of a fresh start. Yes, none of us has committed a capital offense, thank God. And there is a time to say, enough is enough. But the business of judging who shall live and who shall die is a mighty and terrible one. On the question and the mystery of whether the power of the state ought to be harnessed to put our citizens to death, well, the jury is still out. Gamar Chatima Tova.